And our belief is that everybody co-constructs. I mean,
Right.
that's our personal belief, but we're trying to find a way to actually quantify it in some way.
Right. There are some people who would align themselves with a constructivist or a social constructionist view that would balk against quantifying these kinds of things. How do you reconcile that? Or
that's a great question. Well, if Steve DeShazer were here, which he's not, but it would be cool. You know, he would have the whole conversation about we're more post-structural versus postmodern, which is a grand theory. He would even use the term model very loosely. That therapy is really a specific niche, and it doesn't apply. You know, our ideas and assumptions about therapy don't necessarily apply to, you know, how we view the world in terms of change. That we don't really know how change occurs because it's different for everyone.
Right.
So, in terms of quantifying what's going on in the session, I don't really think that it goes against the model. We are just, you know, the model was developed inductively. It was developed with two people in the room. You had Insoo in the room talking with a client, and Steve and Weekland and DeShazer and Weekland in the background, kind of observing what she's doing and noticing what worked. We're kind of doing a similar thing. We're observing what's going on and figuring a way to explain that. And of course, we're quantifying it. In some ways, we're having a way to measure it. You know, when does an utterance begin and end, and what are we going to look for, and how are we going to code it? We don't use the word code, for example. We use the word analyze because code implies that we pigeonhole things into certain categories.
Right.
So our assumption is no, that it will emerge itself. So there's the kind of the qualitative piece to it. So theoretically, I don't think that there's you know, any sort of conflict in beliefs.
This process of microanalysis, I mean, Jan asked you to come in and watch 2 days worth of videotapes, and that must have been a little, it was different than you expected that you were going to get. And so after 2 days, something clicks for you and you go, okay, I see where this is going. How did you, I mean, Jan was familiar with microanalysis, but then she had to teach it to you. Is there a lot written about this, or where did you get your education about microanalysis?
Well, she has written about microanalysis some in terms of the projects she's done. She does a lot of gesture work, like experimental psychology projects using language. But she has not ever written like a book chapter or a book or an article on this is how you do.
How-to pamphlet?
No, she hasn't. She has gotten a little fire recently and encouragement from colleagues about putting this into print. But it's really tricky to nail that down, to actually write about the process without experiencing it. She does, the last few years, she started doing trainings on how to do microanalysis and realized that people would come to the workshop for a couple days and think that, okay, I know how to do this, I'm going to go do a project. It doesn't work that way. You really have to have someone mentor you through the whole process. And that was my experience that I learned, and I had that assumption as well. Like, I'll go for a week, learn how to do it, go back and, you know, do it on my own, although I love to collaborate. So I, you know, learned right away after a couple of days that this isn't something I can just take and do by myself, that we have to do with her. So she is in that process. We've written several articles recently that we're trying to get together for a special issue that give several examples of projects that give people an idea of the methodology. But it's not really something that you could sit down and read in a day and then, you know, try to apply it, which makes it difficult to, you know, to spread. Although we have 14 projects that are either in progress or been completed in the last 4 years, so I think that's pretty good.
If you were, if you had the opportunity to teach a course on microanalysis, how would that course look? I mean, what if you got to structure that from the bottom up? What would that look like? What would a student in that class expect to learn or experience in that class? Maybe experience in that class would be a better way to think about it.
Well, I would think it would be a very different type of research course. It would be one where you would be in the clinic, you would be behind the mirror, you would be doing clinical work, you'd be noticing your colleagues and what they're doing. You would be doing some reading and some, you know, background research on that stuff. But it really would be a hands-on experience. I think there would be a teaching element to it as well, that being a student in that type of course, you would see how this methodology actually impacts all the facets of like what a faculty member would do: teaching, training, researching, supervising. That learning the methodology, you would actually be in all of these different settings and maybe come up with a project or start a project or collaborate together on a project. But it would be totally hands-on and not structured like any other research. I mean, you'd be in the clinic instead of, you know, in a classroom going over PowerPoint slides.
A lot of observation, a lot of learning by doing.
Yes,
like.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and have you had the experience where you are, during this microanalysis process, you start to analyze your units and you start thinking, like, okay, this is what we're seeing, and then you have to take a dramatic turn because it doesn't follow that way? Or is the inductive process that maybe it doesn't lend itself to big surprises like that? I mean, that more of your results are organic. They kind of grow out of the process, and stuff you start thinking about at the beginning usually gets cemented, or I don't know if I'm...
It actually both. I've had both experiences that there have been some instances where there's a huge aha and we do things totally different. We switch gears. One of them has been this project that coming up with a whole unit of analysis, thinking this is the way we've measured things before and individual utterances isn't really capturing what we need to capture. And then other things just solidify over time and reify themselves as we do different projects and have different experiences. Something I've noticed too is that teaching students, I think I teach much differently. How I present information in my classroom, undergraduate and graduate students, is very different.
As a result of learning this and experiencing this yourself. How is it different? Like, let me say, you know, Dr. Smock, newly minted PhD versus now after you've undergone this process. What would the differences be?
I think I'm much more attuned and aware of my audience and responding to their cues, so their body language, their questions. It's much more hands-on. I also slow things down to more of a micro level. You know, as a graduate student, as students, we've always watched, you know, like MinnMFT and all those do therapy, and we'd watch, like, you know, the 40-minute session all straight through. And if we were able to stay awake in class, and we could have a discussion afterwards. But using this, I've noticed that it's 2 minutes of video, and we stay on 2 minutes over and over again for 40 minutes.
The same 2 minutes to go back and...
Yeah. And look at, you know, different things in those 2 minutes, and get much more in depth in not only the process of learning and learning the model and learning therapy and learning communication, and but just the content as well, not only the process. So that has changed the way I teach.